Is Costa Rica losing its agricultural identity, and how can education support this? My reasons for commentating and researching this topic stems from a volunteering trip I made with the Federation of Young Farmers and projects abroad. Our goal as a group was to build a sustainable community garden for a school near the Barra Honda National Reserve we were staying at. It was clear that the project was incredibly important to our guides, crucial for the reason of sustainability. Enabling this education would encourage local interest in farming to combat a large amount of transnational companies that, to local perspective at least, were degrading soil and reducing biodiversity. Most notably, the teca tree plantations were most aggravating and very domineering on the landscape. Famously, these trees require a lot of water, overpowering many plants in close proximity. This practice was seen as unsustainable to biodiversity. It was also clear to see that much of local agricultural land and small holdings were for sale. Oscar and Jose, leading our project, explained that those selling their land struggled to profit from farming it, and with further investigation, it is clear why. The Borgen project outlines the value of agriculture to local needs, with 14% of the population reliant on the sector for work, contributing 6.5% to Costa Rica's gross domestic product. This figure represents a large proportion of the population relying on agriculture directly. In Costa Rica, agricultural workers are more likely to work for transnational companies than for local businesses or on their own farms, of which are diminishing. The Food and Agriculture Organizations of the United Nations revealed the beginning of these inequalities back in 2003. This case study revealed that small landowners commonly rely on multiple incomes as their crops do not support them. Larger farms at this time were limited and usually dedicated to cash crops and managed by firms or international corporations. This change in structure peaked in 2012, as the Borgen project explains. Farming practices have exploited natural resources for short-term gain, including some of Costa Rica's biggest exports of coffee, bananas, and pineapple. As most companies focus on one crop, there is no crop rotation, resulting in a greater need for chemicals, which Shaver et al. Describes as intense and not traditional. However, recently there has been a greater push for sustainable practice, such as the Green Growth Programme by Costa, aiming to develop 200 small and medium enterprises into green businesses with market connections both local and abroad. This programme channels the national pride of sustainable agriculture, making it accessible to smaller businesses. The teak plantations, as mentioned before, sell the majority of their stock to China as cheap wood used for furniture. This means that both profits and products are not directly benefiting Costa Rica's national economy. Especially as Hansen, Schmink, and Aguilar-Stoyn explain, it is common for some countries to offer tax incentives and to have no unions for workers to attract these transnational companies. Focusing on these plantations, Fernandez Moya, Alvarado Hernandez, Forsyth, and March Amelo studied the crop in detail, with particular attention to its hydraulic impact. In general, it is known that forestry consumes greater amounts of water than other land uses, such as animal husbandry and agriculture. It is therefore considered beneficial to have greater variety of crops on a landscape. However, the density of teak and other forestry is vast. This diversity could be encouraged with educational programs and increasing land use for local businesses. Another attractive element for agricultural-based TNCs is the Costa Rican landscape. As EcoForest and Schmink describe, the country is ranked third in the 2010 Environmental Performance Index, making it ideal for environmentally conscious consumers, a trend which has increased in recent years. This is suggestive that, in fact, sustainability is at the forefront of corporate priority, particularly as Costa Rica has a sterling reputation in this field. Blum describes how this was not always the case. After an economic crisis, high levels of deforestation and international debt during the 80s. Since then, Costa Rica has been widely acknowledged for its education and conservation efforts. Things are changing. EcoForest describes this as a strong evolution from initial agricultural activity into a service economy, with tourism as the fastest growing industry. Andriotti and Mario describe how a school classroom is a relatively new concept designed for industrial needs, whereas the priority for education should be developing students socially and being aware of their culture, which is predominantly founded on agriculture. Peterson and Warwick argues that this is a requirement, listing a need to teach students about environmental degradation, particularly when providing food, with knowledge of its potential to impact the terrestrial ecosystems and soil quality, and understanding biodiversity loss, among other things, linking agriculture and conservation, which Costa Rica traditionally holds as paramount. Shields' commentary here is very relevant, that education in one country is not always the ideal for another. Schmink comments on teak plantations in Costa Rica as often sponsoring schools and training centres. This adds to the plethora of organisations and businesses supporting education in Costa Rica. This could be very supportive of local agricultural endeavours, as the Basic Education Coalition in 2013 stated that 4 years of education can increase a farmer's productivity by 8.7%, which led me to investigate further how this education supports students. After talking to Jose, who led the community garden build and many other small-scale farming projects with his initiative La Huerta de Macho, he informed me that agricultural education is not directly encouraged by the government, but many schools do have access to resources or orchards to do this type of hands-on learning, also supported by increasing awareness in sustainability. Blum's research in 2009 focused on the work of non-governmental organisations and local opinion, but these findings correlate with Jose's description of a need for wider education in this field, to maintain Costa Rica's positive agricultural practice and creating a stronger front of local businesses. Looking at the OECD's review of Costa Rica's education, there are suggestions for further development. As this article was published in 2017, it should be particularly relevant, focusing a large amount on tackling the issue of disadvantaged students and poverty. This is something that the World Bank has documented. The headcount ratio for those in poverty is between 20 and 22% of the population between 2011 and 2019. This is significant, representing a fifth of Costa Ricans with little change for at least 8 years, and is something that education should address, as it is particularly important to creating opportunities to combat this. Greater funding in early childhood education was identified as vital for this role, giving students the best encouragement to stay in education. Despite improvement in reducing dropout rates, they still remain twice the OECD recorded average. Both the OECD and PISA have recently published similar reports agreeing that the quality of education needs to improve to provide multiple fields of study. One positive element of Costa Rica's education, however, is the access to education is broad and equal. The Sustainable Development Goals set by the United Nations are relevant to this cause. Costa Rica joined this international effort in 2016, and there is a lot of references to them in the OECD's Education Review of Costa Rica. There is particular relevance to sustainable cities and communities, quality education, responsible consumption and production, and life on land. The sustainable section includes a push to protect and safeguard the world's cultural and national heritage. As previously mentioned by Ecoforest, agriculture is dominant in Costa Rica's early heritage. Secondly, the responsible consumption and production, stating that urgent action is needed to ensure that current material needs do not lead to the over-extraction of resources, to the degradation of environmental resources. Cash crops are very relevant to this urgency, requiring artificial nutrients that often come in the form of harmful chemicals. Rotating crops is more sustainable to soil quality, a quality reflected in traditional local practice, and taught by the Barra Honda programme that I experienced firsthand. This education will allow opportunity for greater localised specialisms in agriculture and other sciences, branching Costa Rica's economic dependency away from the service and tourism sector to broader work and professions. Finally, Life on Land is a section that allows a broader perspective on sustainable development goals. Biodiversity is a concern in this subsection, protecting key areas. Arguably, teak plantations make the use of nature reserves even more important. Due to teak's fast-growing properties, it makes the plant extremely attractive to TNCs, but also relatively damaging to nearby biodiversity. as it requires great levels of water. Other vegetation seldom survives. However, it is noted that the demand for such wood makes it difficult to combat this issue, as, by nature, these companies rely on one singular product. In conclusion, Costa Rica is currently facing a change to its national agricultural identity, which was originally very sustainable and locally developed practice. However, recently there is a high demand for cheap and fast-growing woods and products, and this demand for production is being met in Costa Rica. The impact of this change is important to note. Maintaining culture is key, and education can combat this change to ensure it does not have detrimental social and economic impact. With many different funds for educational projects, there is hope to change poverty rates and increase diversity of jobs, to include small-scale and local agricultural work, to maintain both culture and local pride. While transnational companies are also a significant employer in this area and valuable for this reason, there should be more grants for an even distribution of resources and initiatives set up so that locals have the knowledge and skills to profit from the land. This also helps to maintain biodiversity and traditional farming methods. Thank you very much for listening.